Hello, this is Gary Marr from Glenelg Community College. This screen captures from my CIS133DA spring online class. And in this screen capture, we're going to talk some more about CSS and laying out elements with CSS. And I'm going to be talking about the PowerPoints, but probably spending a little bit more time on the actual sample files. The PowerPoints and the sample files can be downloaded from Canvas. And also in this particular chapter, or with this particular chapter, I think you might want to spend some time with the textbook as we're going through some of these slides, or maybe what you might want to do too is just take your textbook out and look at the example program, make some changes in it, change some of the percentages, change some of the values, get a feel for how CSS can impact the style of your page. All right, let's move ahead here. The CSS uses a box model, and the box model has some new terms we have to learn, like border, margin, padding, and there's going to be some others on the next slides too. And all this pretty much has to do with laying out the content on the page. And as a matter of fact, what I can do right off the bat is, if we go into the page that is used for this particular example, if I show this on Chrome, you will see that what I have here is a box that appears in the middle of the screen. I've also changed this a little bit too. Don't panic if you see that these margins have changed. I had made some changes in some of the CSS just to kind of, mess around with it myself. So these are basically, instead of 30/70, now 50/50 in terms of the percentage size of the article and the box on the left-hand side here. But this is less than the entire page, and visually this is much more appealing than I think if I block this off for the entire page. This is the kind of thing that CSS does for you. It should make things visually more appealing and easier to follow. So this slide's got all the different sections of that box model identified for you. It's also in the textbook. I like this particular table especially because it identifies specifically what each one of these new properties is, where it is in the box, some of the settings for it. What I would do is take this table, look at the actual sample code in the external CSS file and follow it and see if you can understand what's going on. This is one particular assignment, or I should say unit, where I think that if you go into the external style file and CSS style file and just make some changes, I think that's an excellent way to learn this. For example, the aside selector, I changed to 50%. I also changed the article to 50%. I messed around with this thing. I changed the absolute size or max width size to 900 pixels instead of, I think it was 800 or 750 initially. Mess with stuff like this and then go back, and after you've messed with it, save it, go back to the browser, and then you should then see a change. So in my case, my box should be bigger than yours, and also I divided the aside and the article as 50/50, whereas the additional assignment, the one that came with the textbook, is 30/70. This is the best way to learn this stuff. I mean, I could certainly go over PowerPoint slides all day long. You can also read. I think the best thing to do is go out there, open up Notepad++, make some changes, save it, and then redisplay the page. See what kind of change, what kind of effect it had on the page. I think that's the best way to learn this stuff sometimes. Units of measure. Typically, what happens with a lot of web stuff, not just CSS, but also HTML and other web products also, is that typically things are expressed in relative or absolute terms. Relative units would be next to, top of, bottom. Absolute would be, in this case, pixels, the size of something, or it might even be a reference to where on the page, down 15 over 10 pixels, something like that. This is very common in the world of the internet, and the table below there gives you some idea of some of the range values. Go back and look at the file again. Make some changes. I changed mine from, I think, 7 or 750 to 900, just to see what visually would happen to my display, my browser display. Again, sizes. The best thing to do here is to look at the code, make some changes. There's nothing more I can share there. What they've done here is kind of interesting, is they're trying to estimate, or guesstimate, I guess, is the width of the page as it's being designed. And up top is the actual CSS. Down below, they put a kind of a chart in place to share how things would fall in terms of the hierarchy. And this might be a helpful thing to look at. I would suggest you give it a shot and take it from there. Let's see. Collapse, bottom, top. Again, this is stuff that's probably better covered inside the actual files, where you can manipulate the actual changes. This is also a section which I believe is probably better described in the book, because in the book we'll show you the actual visualization of what they're talking about next to the explanation in text. Otherwise, this ends up being a little bit confusing. Not a bad slide here. The table is the most important one for this one. Again, we're talking about borders. This is sizing and width. I mean, I've talked about this already. I've made some changes. I guess my initial value was 640. In my example I just showed you, I just changed it to 900. See what the change was. Excuse me. There's the page itself. Again, this is before the aside was put in here, so it's a little bit different than what the final view of this page will look like. Padding margins, I'm going to let that sit as is. Look over the code itself. Page flow is going to be somewhat interesting. You can cause things to float. You can clear to the right or left of particular HTML elements. So what they have here is an example of the different blocks on the screen. These could be div tags. They could be an article, they could be an aside, they could be a header or a footer, and you can, with float commands and clear commands, position things as such to make them more appealing. The normal, for example, the normal parsing of an HTML file without any float applied to it would look something like this, but as you will see in my page over here, let me get back to the HTML, that the aside appears next to the article, side by side. This effect could be done with a table in HTML, but it can also be accomplished more efficiently with CSS by defining an aside value and having it float to the left of the article, and that way they're not stacked, but they're side by side. This is some of the things that can happen with CSS. You can also do this stuff sometimes with HTML, but I think the CSS is certainly the better way to go. One, because it's the most adopted now, and a lot of the stuff that you can do with HTML has been deprecated because it's more efficient. You do this with this CSS style statements. Oh, let's see. Here's some more stuff on float. Clear is kind of interesting too. What you can do is you can use float and clear together. And I guess the example they're trying to talk about here is on our footer. We want the footer to appear by itself at the bottom. And by putting a clear in the footer style section, it makes sure that nothing appears to the right of it, so therefore it kind of stays alone by itself. Again, all of this could be accomplished a couple different ways, but doing it with the CSS is the most efficient and the most, I would say, professionally accepted way of accomplishing this. Let's see, I think they're going to show us some code. Well, yes, right here you can see they've got clear right there, which means it's going to wipe anything clear. Anything clear to the right of the browser. You can also fix things specifically with pixels. I think they have an example here someplace. Let's find it. Here we are at the border. The border is specifically addressing pixels. Again, it's that 640 that I changed to 900. You can use the relative values of 100%, but you can also use fixed values. This will get you a lot of flexibility, but just be careful. You could end up getting in trouble with this, but typically what will happen is as soon as it appears out of position, you may have to go back to your HTML, make some changes, resave it, and then also reload it so you can see what it looks like now inside your browser. Relative positioning has more to do with right, left, top, bottom. There's the table for it, and there should be an example in the code. There's the code. It happens to be in the container, and they're doing a position relative. Stacking order is typically the z-index, and it can cause things, there's the slide right there, to appear on top of each other. Not a lot of that going on in this particular example, although it could. I've done pages where that was important. What they're doing here is they're just making sure, again, that the header section is stacked on top the way it is. All right, I guess that's probably all we need to get to for this particular chapter. This one's kind of tricky in terms of the PowerPoints. I really don't know if the PowerPoints are as effective as the book in just going out and changing the values in Notepad++, working with it that way. If you have any questions, let me know. You will have an assignment on this, and the good news is in the back of the assignments, they typically show you screenshots of what it should look like, but if it's not coming out the way you want it to or the way you expect it to, you can always let me know. Thank you.